Alright, I'm going to attempt to read Jesse Stewart, Clearing in the Sky and Other Stories, out loud, because I want to go in the town of Smithfield, sit out in public, no profit, nothing else, just for fun, and read stories, see if I can't get a crowd gathered around me. This one I'm going to read today is Fight number 25. It's about a fellow that catches a wildcat up a tree, brings it down, sells it, thinks he sold it to somebody else, but a guy puts it in a cage and he fights these dogs, and the dogs all get killed. So this is the story of Fight number 25 of Eddie Bartelstreif and his dog. I just taken my first shipment of hides to Greenwood Express office when Hayes Stapleton saw me. "Eddie, hey! You, Eddie Bartelstreif! Just a minute," Hayes hollered at me. "I want to see you." "Make it snappy," I yelled. "I want to get this batch of hides on number 3. I didn't want to fool with Hayes, for every time he'd stop me in his life, he wanted to borrow something from me, or he wanted me to do something for him. "Eddie, I had bad luck last night," Hayes grunted as soon as he reached me. "What happened?" I asked. "Lost my good tree dog, Old Rags, and $100 to boot," he sighed. "You caused it, Eddie." "How did I cause it?" I asked him. "Remember that big wildcat you catched out on Seaton Ridge?" he asked me. "But what does that have to do with your losing your best tree dog and $100? I asked. "That wildcat went to West Virginia." "West Virginia, hell," Hayes said. "That wildcat's right up here in Auckland in a cage. I wish that wildcat's hide was among this batch of fur you're expressing. I'd be a lot better off." How'd that wildcat get to Auckland?" I said. "I sold him to Elmer Pratt." "You know who's got that wildcat now?" "No, I don't." "Jason Radnor's got him," Hayes told me. "Jason Radnor?" I said. "Yep, Jason Radnor's got him," Hayes said, shaking his head sadly. "He got him in a big cage, and you pay $1 to get in to see the cat fight a dog. If you fight a dog against the cat, you pay $5, and there's a plenty of betting going on. Old Jason will cover any bet that cat will whip a dog. Now he's even giving odds. Last night, bets went up to $500. Jason covered everything that man bet against his cat. I sold that wildcat to Elmer Pratt for $50, I said. "I don't need a cat. I don't want to keep him. I could get more out of him I could get more for him the way that I could for this here pelt." "I know it's bad, Eddie," Hayes said, "but I thought I'd tell you. I thought you ought to know about it." "Yes, I'm glad you told me," I said, as I began thinking about what the wildcat had done to Hayes' dog. "I need to know about it. Where do they have that cage?" "Over the hill from the slaughterhouse where we used to fight our game roosters. But listen, Eddie," Hayes went on to warn me, "if you're thinking about taking old Buck up there and fighting that cat, you better be careful. I'm a-telling you, Eddie. It looked like easy money to me. And I went after it. Old Scout killed many a wildcat too, but he never fit one like this cat. He'll never fight another cat. Scout was the 19th dog that wildcat's killed. Boys told me up there last night that old Jason was a-feeding the wildcat beef blood to make him mean. Never saw a meaner cat in my life. Didn't hardly get old Scout in the cage until the cat sprang on him and laid open his side until you could see a whole panel of his ribs." "But that didn't kill him?" I said. "Nope. That old cat spat him with the other paw," Eddie said. "That finished the best dog I ever had. Had to give a man $5 to take Scout out behind the house and shoot him to put him out of his misery. Guns barked all the time I was there. Had to take the dogs that fit the cat out behind the house and polish them off. "I'd fight that wildcat myself," I said as I thought about the poor dogs that cat had mangled. "I'll go in the cage with it." "Somebody'd have to be polishing you off too," Eddie said. "Now don't get riled. Don't get worked up and lose your head. And if I'd have knowed it would have upset you like this, I would not have told you." I stood a minute looking down at the toe of my shoe. I thought about the October night when old Buck put the cat up the tree and the way he ran it, full speed like he's after a fox. That was the way Buck had put many a coon up a tree. And just as he treed, I hurried to the tree, thinking he'd got me a coon. But when I reached the place where he was barking up a great saw-timbered size oak with branches big enough for cross ties, sprangled out from its bushy top, I knew it wasn't any coon. I hardly had to use my lamp, for the big wagon wheel of an October moon was as bright as day and flooded the fields and woods with light. And the wind had whipped enough of the rich wine-colored leaves around the tree so that I could about see over every limb. I walked around the tree looking up and spied the old cat stretched out, his belly against a big flat limb. He didn't look worried to me. He looked like a cat that was full of confidence. He was a pretty thing, laying up there on the limb with his head a-sticking over and his eyes shining like wind-whipped embers on a pitch-black night. "Buck, you won't fight him," I said to myself. "I'll take care of him myself." So I went up to the tree with my lasso rope. The old cat didn't mind my climbing up there. He lay perfectly still. He was taking himself a good rest. Buck had crowded him pretty hard in the chase. He didn't let him get out to the Artner rock cliffs. That was where the wildcats denned. I climbed up about the right distance and hung my lamp on a twig. I looked over for the right opening to throw my rope so I wouldn't hit a limb and scare the cat and make him jump for the tree. I didn't want Buck to fight this cat. I wanted to take him alive. I found the right opening. I steadied myself and threw my lasso. Guess I was lucky. It went around his neck. I jerked the slack out as the cat jumped, but I had it. The more he jumped, the tighter the rope drew around his neck. And when his long red tongue popped out in his mouth, I drew him up to me, some weight at the end of the rope. I took him from the tree and released the lasso enough to give him breath to keep him alive. I tied his feet with the cords good and tight. I kept the lasso tight enough not to give him too much wind. I put the wildcat under my arm and I carried him to Blakesburg. Old Buck wasn't satisfied because he didn't get to fight the cat, and he trailed along at my heels a little disappointed. But I knew this was a good catch for one night. It was more than a coffee sack full of dead possums, coons, polecats, minks, weasels, and foxes. If you hunt in these woods, $50 for one night is not to be sneezed at. And it made me the most respected hunter in Blake County, for I was the only man that had ever gone up a tree and took a wildcat with my hands and carried him home in my arms. I mean, I can picture that. That's why I like Jesse Stewart. People knew that I did it, for I'd done it many times before. Older hunters than I had seen me do it. I took the wildcat home, put him in a cage, and when people passed along the street, they'd come up to look at him. And it pleased me when they walked over to see what kind of looking man I was. Just a short, slender, beanpole-sized man with a little scraggly beard that could go up a tree and catch a wildcat. "Eddie, I'm telling you not to fight old Buck against the cat," Hayden said. "If you'd seen that thing cut a dog all to pieces once, you'd never go up in the tree and take him down anymore. You'd lose your nerve." The way my poor old scout run to the side of the cage, looked at me, and cried like a baby. Hayden's voice changed until I thought he was crying. I'll never be able to forget. I couldn't stand to see that, I thought. I love dogs too well. But I didn't say another word to Hayden. Thoughts were running through my mind. I walked into the express office and left Hayden standing. "Remember, Eddie, that dog was the 19th dog that cat had killed," Hayden warned me. "Remember, Radnor, take your money in." I didn't hear the rest of his words. I knew what I was going to do. I knew Buck, or I, one, would fight the cat. I didn't want to kill him any more dogs, and I knew that I'd like to fight Jason Radnor to even up an old score. I didn't care if he did weigh 290. I hardly knew what I was doing when I expressed my batch of hides. I went to the First and People's Bank and drew out every dollar I'd ever saved. When I got home, I went over to the corner of the house where I had old Buck tied. "Buck, one of us has to kill a wildcat tonight," I said. "You think you can do it?" Old Buck looked up at me with his big, soft brown eyes. Then I unsnapped his chain and started across the yard. I was on my way. "You're not going to hunt this early," Molly said, when she saw me heading Buck across the yard. "Yep, I am," I said. "There's a wildcat that's killing a lot of dogs, and we want to get him." "Do be careful, Eddie," Molly warned me. "If it's that dangerous and old Buck trees it, don't you go up and take it from that tree." "I'll promise you I won't take it from a tree," I said. Sorry. I wonder if old Jason will remember me, I thought, as I walked toward Auckland, a distance of 12 miles. When I reached the shack down the hill from the slaughterhouse, there was a man ahead of me with a big English bull. "There's the dog that'll kill that damn wildcat," a beardy-faced man said, pointing to the big, broad bulldog. The beardy-faced man looked at old Buck. Then he looked at me. Buck wasn't a big dog, and he looked pinched in too, for I hadn't fed him anything. I didn't want to feed him anything before the fight. Buck smelled blood and trouble. He held his tail down as if he were about to spring at something. Then I heard a pistol go off behind the house, and I knew another dog was finished. Buck was on his mettle, for he didn't know exactly what was taking place. I pulled my hat down low and got my $600-odd ready. Soon as the big red-faced man ahead of me had paid the $5 to fight his bulldog, I stepped up to the entrance. "Say, feller," said the tall, hatcher-faced man at the door, "you don't aim to fight that dog against this wildcat, do you? He's not as big as the wildcat." "I want to fight the dog or fight the wildcat myself," I said. Then I gave a wild laugh. The man looked at me with his black, beady eyes like he thought I was crazy, but he let me inside the shack. It was a big room filled with men and a few dogs. Over at the far end of the room was a big wire cage, and inside the cage lay the same old wildcat that I had taken from the oak tree on Seaton Ridge. He was a-laying there as peaceful like, just like any cat, with his head across his paws, as if he wanted to sleep. And the men and the dogs wouldn't let him. He looked just as mean as he did that night. I carried him back to Blacksburg. His big tushes hung over his lips, and his whiskers looked like old Davy Burton's handlebar mustache. Beardy-faced men with mean-looking eyes stood back and looked at the cat. I led Buck up to the cage where he could get a whiff of the cat. I looked down to see what Buck thought. All he did was jerk his tail. He never even growled. When the big, clean-shaven, well-dressed man led his bulldog up to the cage, the bull tried to break through to the cat. He trembled all over, growled, and scratched the floor. When he barked, the slobbers flew from his big mouth. "I'm putting up $100 on that dog," a man said. "What odds you giving?" And then the bet started. I looked over against the wall, and there sat big Jason Radner behind a table, counting money to cover the bet. Since the cat belonged to Jason, no one but him was allowed to bet on the cat. Jason covered all the money that was bet on the dog, given 3-2 odds. It was a funny way to bet on the dog. Given 3-2 odds? It was a funny way to bet. And we never bet that way at rooster fighting. I guess that's why everybody wanted to see the cat killed. Jason was raking in the money. But I wanted to see the cat killed because it was killing the dogs. "Jason's got a gold mine with that cat," said a tall, lantern-jawed man was standing beside me. And while the greenbacks were shelled out on top of the table, for the bulldog was a good bet, Jason pulled money from a drawer and covered each bet. I watched Jason to see if he was looking at me and if he recognized me. But he was too busy betting and making money to recognize anybody. He was sitting there with all that money around him. I knew this kind of betting was better than playing poker on Sundays or spitting at craps. Jason was in the money. "Say, mister, what have you been feeding that bulldog?" asked a short, dark-complexioned man. "Beef blood and beef bones," the owner said. I've been feeding him that, getting him ready for this fight ever since Radner first brought that cat here." "I'll bet 100 then," the man said. Jason covered his 100 while the bulldog charged at the chain. "All bets in?" Jason asked. There wasn't any answer. "Let him in the gate, little man," Jason said. A little man with a scattered, heavy beard along his weather-beaten face unlocked the cage door, and the big man patted his dog on the back. "He's a good-looking bull to be slaughtered by that cat," I thought. "Take him, Buck, and good luck," the man spoke with a trembling voice as he unsnapped the collar, and the bulldog charged full force toward the cat. As the bulldog charged at its throat, the cat leaped high in the air, and when it came down on the dog's back, it raked a paw around his slats, his big claws, longer than a tack hammer, sinking deeper and deeper as the bulldog groaned. "There goes my money," a man shouted. "There goes all of our money," the tall man said. "Damn, I wish that we'd get a dog that could kill that hell cat. I've lost over $1,000 in this dang haul." I didn't listen to all the men said. I looked down at my Buck. He was moving his tail like a cat does when it sees a mouse and gets ready for the crouch. When the poor bulldog got the cat's claws from his ribs, he came over to the wire and cried like a baby. I never heard a more pitiful crying. It hurt me through and through to hear it. "He's through," a man said. "When they do that, they've had enough. Take him from the cage." He didn't look like he was clawed up too badly until he came from the cage. "Mister, you'll have to have Sherman to polish him off," the little man said. "He's through. If you don't have him polished, he'll die by degrees." When the well-dressed man led his bulldog out behind the house to have Sherman polish him off, another tall, lanky man from Culp Creek came up with a big mountain cur. He was a long dog with a mean black eye. You might not get to fight the cat, Buck, I thought. If I were betting, I'd bet on this dog. What have you been feeding this dog, mister? A little stoop-shouldered man asked. Corn Dodger, the cur's owner said. Just what you feed a good dog. I was raised on it, mister, another man said. I'm betting 50 on your dog. Looks like a good bet to me, a tall, lanky man with the fuzzy chin whiskers said. I like his build. Listen to him growling at that cat. Sounds like low thunder. But the bets didn't go as high as they did on the English bull. I looked over at Jason's table, and I didn't see the stacks of greenbacks like I'd seen there a few minutes before. And just as the last money was in, and Jason was covering it, we heard a pistol fire twice. The English bull had been polished off, and the big mountain cur, with his bristles raised on his back like jutted rocks along the top of a winter-bleak mountain, charged to get against the chain to get to the cat. Ready to go, little man? Jason asked. Turn him in. The beard-scant, weathered-looking little man who tended to the cage, unlocked the door, and the tall man let the big cur inside and unsnapped the collar. When the cat saw this big black mountain cur, he never rose to his feet, but laid flat on his back as the dog charged. And just as the dog started over for the cat's throat, he ripped into him from underneath with both hind feet. The cur whined, fell over, got up again, and whined as pitifully as a small baby crying. He walked slowly to the corner of the cage. I couldn't bear to look at him. I wanted to get in that cage so bad I could hardly stand it. It's a shame, one of the men said, to fight good dogs against that murdering wildcat. You can feed them beef, beef's blood, corn dodger, and anything you want to feed them, but that doesn't make any difference when it comes to a fight. No dog has stayed with that cat 3 minutes. Lost again, another man said, not paying any attention to the poor cur that had lost its life. Lost another $50. Sighs went up from among the mean-eyed men when Little Man pulled the cur through the door. He was awful to look at, and to think of him now makes me mad. Old Buck looked at the poor cut-to-pieces cur disgustedly. Get him, Sherman, quick, the Little Man said. Let him polish him off as soon as he can, to put him out in his misery. We saw 2 more fights. We saw the cat lay on his back and cut a pretty shepherd to pieces. There wasn't much betting on this fight, although the shepherd came to the nearest to getting to the cat's throat as any of the dogs. And there was a big brindle bulldog that the cat seemed to hate more than any dog that had been turned in. That bull never even got close to the wildcat. He had him cut to pieces before he got halfway across the cage. Well, what was left of him was dragged outside by his master, a well-dressed city man from Auckland. I'm glad it's over, said a big fat man with a handlebar mustache. I'd rather see cockfighting, a boxing bout, or a wrestling match any old time as to see these good-looking dogs go in there and get ripped up. Yep, I'd rather go with my wife to see the movies as to slip out here to this awful place and see this, said the tall man who bet heavily on every fight against the cat. It's a wonder this place ain't been raided by the law. But it's not over yet, I said loud enough so the men could hear me. They were mixing around and intermingling in the crowded room, getting ready to leave. I couldn't blame them for that. I'd smelled enough and I'd seen enough for one evening. The smell in the shack was awful. The crowd was awful too. Couldn't understand how anybody could enjoy seeing dogs cut to pieces by a wildcat. But that dog can't do anything, one man said. That cat would kill him before Little Man got him inside. Little Man ain't a-putting this dog in, I said. I'm going in that cage with him myself. What's that I hear? Jason said from over in the corner as he stacked money away. I'm going to take old Buck in myself, I said. Are you crazy, feller? Jason said. Don't you know if a man gets ripped up there, we can't have Sherman polish him off, and this place would be raided sure enough. I wouldn't be afraid to fight that cat, I said. Give me a piece of rope 14 feet long, and I'll fight him. Don't be foolish, Jason said. You don't seem to know much about the power of a wildcat. Then I heard a lot of whispers in the crowd. I heard men saying that I was off in my head. How much you willing to bet that my wildcat won't kill your dog? Jason said. You'll be the only one to bet on your dog. No one else will. I think I got about $653, I said. It's my life savings, and I don't want to bet at all. Well, I've got 10 times that, Jason said. I'll put my pile against yours. Then the men who had been moving toward the door stopped. They were surprised at the money I had. And they were surprised when Jason said he'd put up all he had against what I had. They knew he had a pile, for he had taken their money on 24 fights. My dog was number 25 for that cat to fight. And I knew all the men except Sherman, Little Man, Jason, and the fellow who took our money at the door would be for me. They wanted to see my dog win. Mr. Radnor, I hate to bet all my money, I said. If I lose, I won't have $1 in the world left, and my dog will be gone. Well, that's what you came here for, to fight that old mongrel, wasn't it? Jason said gruff as he put the last roll of bills back in the table drawer. And I'd as soon have your money as anybody else's. Yes, but I didn't know you had such a big wildcat, I said. I can't stand to see it killing all these fine-looking dogs. Come on or get out, Jason said. After all, we bet here. This isn't a playhouse. It's a fighting house. Will you let me take my dog inside? If you will, I'll put my pile against your pile. I'm afraid of it, Jason said. Let him learn, one of the men shouted. We've seen about everything now. Let's see something new. I'm willing to run the risk, Jason said thoughtfully, as he arose from the table and looked me over. Then I went over to the table and counted out my money. Jason brought his from the drawer, and I made him look inside to see that the drawer was clean. You watch the money, men, I said to the fellows gathered around me. I want this to be square and honest. We'll see to that, said the fellow that had lost the big English bull. Sure we will, said the one that had lost the cur. Then open the door, little man, I said. Old Buck didn't growl, and he didn't charge against the chain. He looked at the cat and jerked his tail. He's a funny dog, said one of the men behind me. But I didn't look back to see who had said it. I had my eye on the cat. Buck had his eye on the cat. Then I reached down, rubbed his back, patted his head as I reached midway of the cage. The cat lay perfectly still. He planned to work on Buck like he did the big mountain cur. Then I unsnapped Buck's chain. Buck crouched halfway, but he crept slowly toward the cat as I stepped to one side. Men rushed up and stood on their toes around the cage like something was going to happen. Buck went close, but he wouldn't go farther. Watch him, Buck, I said. let him make the first move. Buck held like an Irish setter. He didn't go a step. The cat looked at him with his shiny green eyes, and Buck looked back at the cat. Then all at once, the cat began to crouch. Buck held his position. The cat made a flying charge, and Buck flattened on the cage floor. As the cat went over, Buck whirled and sprang from behind like April lightning. He caught the cat across the skull, and the sound went plunk. It was a light crash, but the cat sprawled senseless on the floor, its legs quivering and drawing up to its body and then out again, each time a little weaker. "What did that dog do?" a man asked me. "What about that?" another man said. "Leave that money, or there'll be another death," I heard a voice growl. "That dog knows how to treat wildcats," I said, "and he knows how to kill them. It's been a suicide. It's been suicide on the dogs to put them in there. Dogs that never fought a wildcat. Buck knows that a wildcat's skull is as easy to crush as a rabbit's. It's a little bit easier. A wildcat's skull is thinner." "Good boy, Buck." I patted his head. I snapped the chain into his collar, and we left the cage. The wildcat had breathed his last. "There's your cat, Jason Radnor," I said. "He'll never kill another dog. And the money you made by clawing dogs to pieces won't do you any good." "Who are you anyway?" Jason said, his voice trembling. He was shaking all over. "Jason, I'm the man that caught that wildcat," I said. "My dog treed it, and I went up to the tree and brought it down with my hands. I'm Eddie Bartlestrife. You remember my dad, don't you? Remember? You tried to kill him. Shot him not 4 feet away between the eyes, but didn't kill him. The bullet parted his hair. He was taking a few quarters from you in a poker game that Sunday afternoon. Now don't shake, Jason. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want all that money. It's good money, and I like money. And I like to see old Buck kill a wildcat that's killed 24 dogs." "Easy, Radnor," said the tall man that owned the cur. "Don't move. Keep your hands up. He took your money, and he took it fair." "Fairer than the way you got it from us," the bulldog owners said. "Nice bank account now," I said, as I picked up the rolls of greenbacks and put them in my hunting coat. "It's a fraud," Jason wept. "It's a stick-up." "Easy, Mr. Radnor," the tall man said as I walked from the shack with old Buck. "Keep your hands up." "You won't have to polish this dog off, Sherman," I said as I went through the door. "You can bury your cat." Well, that's Jesse Stewart, fight number 25. Thank you.